This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Another Fins, Fur, and Feathers episode from Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken at K-State kicks off today's show. The pair chat about fish people can find in Kansas and a few of their unique characteristics. K-State's Tina Sullivan and Jonathan Aguilar continue the show by explaining what growers with irrigation systems should look over and inspect before starting irrigation. Ending the show is K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk discussing the importance of providing quality care to heifer calves soon after birth and the impact it can have further down the line. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show with part of K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken's Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode.
Percids are a big family of fish. They're second only to minnows, which are known as cyprinids. And so a really diverse group of fish that are found in Kansas, and anglers a lot of times are out fishing for some of those, but we're going to chat about the Percids today. Good topic for us to jump into here in early spring.
Good. I'm excited about that. I guess before we go further in, biologists sometimes have different terms that they use to talk about different things. So you said Percids and cyprinids. So if we're thinking about, how that fits into why we're calling these fish those names, what is that? What's that represent?
So their family name is Percidae and Cyprinidae, right? And so we just shorten those down. It's talking about a family, which is kind of a large group that has a bunch of similarities. From there, we'd break it down into genus and species, and that kind of would tell you, just a little bit more specifically what type of fish we're looking at. So we're talking about families, the family of Percidae today, the Percid group. So they're going to have a lot of similarities, some differences that we're going to chat through.
Good. So what are some common Percids that people might know of?
Sure. The ones that most of our listeners are probably familiar with are going to be walleye, yellow perch, saugeye, sauger. So those are the ones that are kind of at the top of the list. Most people are going to have eaten a walleye sandwich or been out fishing for them. They're going to understand those a lot. A lot of the diversity in this family, though, is in little fish called darters. And these darters really like flowing water. And, there are some really, really pretty darters out there. I've had a native fish tank in a lab in the past, and people have walked in and said, oh, where are these fish from? And when you show them a rainbow darter, an orange-throat darter with the coloration, they're surprised to hear that they're in Kansas. So fun to see those pretty fish.
So what about sauger?
Yeah, sauger are another native species. Their native range overlaps a lot with walleye. They tend to be a little bit more east and a little bit more south from their extent, and they don't go quite as north up into Canada. They tend to be a little bit smaller bodied fish. But if you were to hold them up side by side, most people, if you looked at them, would think they're the same species. But some of the differences we can look at, that the bottom of their tail usually doesn't have that white spot on it, really obvious. Their cheeks are going to be rough. If you rub their hand over their cheeks, you're going to feel some rough scales on there. It might not be completely covered, but you're going to feel a little bit of a rough patch. One of the things you're going to see relatively quickly is dark blotches on the side of their body. That's going to be kind of indicative that you have a sauger. Their spiny dorsal fin is going to have circles kind of patterned on there in a relatively consistent manner.
When we're moving these fish around and stocking bodies of water, do we always put in either sauger or walleye, or do we like to have hybrids of them?
Back early, before the 1970s or so, we would stock mostly walleye is what we were stocking. There would have been some sauger that were stocked, but it was mostly walleye. What we see with walleye is that their recruitment, once you release a bunch of fry or fingerlings, they didn't have a very high survival rate. And so they weren't recruiting well. Recruiting means kind of joining the population at different size classes, right? And so they weren't growing up to a size where they could be fished very easily. And so we started looking for some different ways to do that, and we started crossing sauger and saugeye. Most of the time, that's what we're stocking these days, primarily in most of the reservoirs around Kansas and around North America.
What do walleye, saugeye, and sauger eat?
Yeah, they're going to eat a lot of the same things, right? And so they like to eat little fish. A lot of their diet are fish that we don't necessarily want in high amounts in reservoirs or other areas that we'd be stocking them. So things like gizzard shad. We've talked about gizzard shad are generally small, but they can grow up and get bigger to a size where nothing can eat them. And that can become a concern because they eat a lot of plankton, which can compete with some of the other fish we want. So they're going to be eating a lot of those. They eat a lot of freshwater drum. They'll eat small walleye sometimes. White crappie are another fish. All these species that I'm mentioning are fish that can easily get out of control if there's not a predator in the system. So they have a really important function, even if they're eating, crappie, which a lot of people want to go catch. If we don't have something eating those crappie, we're quickly going to end up with too many crappie, and then you're going to crash your fishery. So I think sometimes people get caught off guard when we say that they are eating crappie or something like that, but it's part of a balanced system, right? Invertebrates. So I'm sure, if you've gone fishing for them before, this is a great time of year to use a night crawler. So they love to eat night crawlers. Up north, leeches, they'll eat crayfish, they'll eat bugs that fall in. So, they're kind of eating a lot of different things out there.
Are these a fish that we're going to put into a farm pond, or are they mainly fish we put in reservoirs or rivers, or how's that work?
Sure. Normally we're not going to want to stock walleye. Now, I say normally because if you love walleye enough, it's possible to put them in a larger pond, but it's going to take a lot of management in order to keep them there and get them to a point that you're happy with it. You got to remember that they're a predatory fish, and so they're going to cruise around and they're going to eat a lot of other fish. You have to make sure that they have enough food there to grow up. They don't like warm water. And in Kansas, even a 10, 12, 14 foot deep pond, that water heats up enough, right? Yeah. And if it doesn't, a lot of times that's because it's stratified. And if you have stratification, the hypolimnia, the deeper water, is cool, but it doesn't have any oxygen. And so the fish can't go down there if they can't breathe. And so then they're trapped in the upper layer where it gets warmer. Walleye especially are really susceptible to warmer temperatures. And so it's going to be hard to get them established in a pond, a smaller pond. Not necessarily something you can't do, but it's going to take a lot of management in order to get it to be successful. It would be very rare that I would recommend them as a fish to stock in a pond.
What about structure in that pond? Would their habitat requirements be different than the other critters?
Well, they really like rocky substrate, right? And so you'd have to make sure that you have some big boulders of some sort build up. The other thing that happens in ponds is a lot of times they're smaller, and so predation risks for the eggs can tend to be higher. Getting that recruitment success, making sure you have enough plankton in a smaller area, it's just very hard.
What about reproduction?
These fish are reproducing somewhere between March and May, and a little bit earlier, the farther south you go, our water temperatures warm up a little bit sooner. So we're seeing reproduction, in Kansas, maybe starting late March and then continuing through the middle of April. Maybe there's a couple fish still spawning at the end of April, but that's kind of our hot spot. If you were to go up to northern Minnesota or North Dakota, Upper Peninsula, Michigan, we're probably pushing that back towards May. And so they're reproducing kind of that spring time frame. They really like gravel or big rocky structures. So you'll see, and we've talked about them stacking up on dams, and a lot of times that's because those dams are lined with really big boulders. That's the type of habitat they like, right? And so the other thing they historically did, they can migrate really long distances upstream. And I remember being fascinated when I learned about fish migration, that they could swim hundreds of miles upstream, right? And so walleye used to migrate upstream, 100 plus miles. And that's important for if we're talking about fishing, because that means they might stack up underneath dams.
Sure.
Right? And the tailwaters might be a good opportunity for you to go out and harvest some of them that you see in those areas. They have kind of a cool reproductive strategy where they get a lot of males kind of stacked up. You'll have 6, 8, 10 males kind of in an area with one big female. And that female is going to have 50 to 100,000 eggs. And the males sometimes do this neat little dance where they kind of, swim up and back and up and back. And then eventually they kind of push the female on her side and push along her belly and help get some of those eggs out. So that doesn't always occur. Sometimes the female just releases her eggs. But that process of watching them kind of nuzzle along the belly and releasing those eggs is kind of neat. And then you'll have 8 to 10 males that will fertilize those eggs to help with genetic diversity. So once those eggs are released and fertilized, mom and dad take off. They go back down to deeper waters, and the eggs are left to fend for themselves. So really low survival rate, but a lot of eggs that we'd see there.
What are some main tips you can give folks so that they can be effective at catching saugeye, walleye, or sauger?
Yeah, get out there is the first thing.
Sure.
The more time you spend out there, the more luck you're going to have. Fishing at dusk, dawn, or overnight is generally best, and they like cooler temperatures. So getting out in the spring or fall is going to be a little bit easier to catch them. They like to not have a lot of light, and so during the day they're going to tend to be deeper. So if you're trolling crankbaits, you want something that's going to get down deep. If you're kind of going after them, make sure that they're really deep. If you're in an area where you're just targeting them, you might use something like a bottom bouncer or that Lindy rig that I talked about, where you're literally dragging just above the surface down there where the walleye are hanging out and feeding kind of in those areas where it's a little bit darker. But they're not as aggressive as some other fish, so trolling a little bit slower is something a lot of times that seems to be beneficial. But and then if you're not having any luck, change your bait. And so, one of the things that we see a lot when we talk to people is night crawlers might work great one day, and the next day you might need leeches or minnows or something, and that might change from morning to night. And so if you're not having luck, change up what you're doing. This time of year, I know they're out catching them a lot on twisty-tailed grubs that have a night crawler on the end of it, right? So try different colors, try different speeds of retrieval. Just get out there and have fun is the big thing.
That was K-State's Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but you can find this full podcast episode by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing getting irrigation systems ready to go with K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan and K-State Water Resources engineer Jonathan Aguilar. Tina, Jonathan, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thanks for having us.
So as we're thinking about getting those irrigation systems ready to go, first wanting to make sure all animals are clear of the systems?
Yes, during the winter time, some animals really want to stay around the center pivot system or the irrigation system or even just the pumping system. So we would like to make sure that we don't mess around with some of those animals. Some of them are just something that you could just deal with, or some of them could be very dangerous to be dealing with. So we just want to make sure that in the checklist that you'd like to do before the start of the season, deal with it.
And it's making sure rodents or even larger animals, think of like a raccoon or a skunk. The last thing we want is those kind of creatures clogging up a pipe. But also we need to check our wiring systems to make sure they haven't chewed through anything in a gearbox or a pumping panel, just to make sure everything does run properly when we need it. There was a story back home of a skunk making its little den in a pivot system, and they tried to blow it out, and that was not an ideal situation.
And is blowing out and making sure everything's cleaned out really important in this process as well?
That is true, because we would like to make sure to have a seamless start of the season. And one of those things that we should probably do is just making sure that the system is flushed out. Things could accumulate on those pipes as you are trying to put them out in the season, or animals could have been going into as well. So just trying to flush them out, mud or any other sediments out there to prevent any other issues later on, particularly clogging, as we try to deal with some of those smaller nozzles in the system.
Is there also some preparation work that needs to be done when it comes to lubricants, filters, different fluids?
So any of our moving parts or the engine or the pumping system, anything that's got any of those coolants, thinking of your car, right? You should probably change your oil every 5,000 miles for a car. You should also change those coolants, oils, lubricants, and all those moving parts just to make sure they're running to the best of their abilities. Because even though they might not be doing 5,000 miles, they might be putting on 500 hours.
What are some things that might need greased?
Oh, anything that has friction that is being put on. So we might want to put any grease on that. It reminds me of being an engineer. We always have something on our engineer's tool. If it needs to move, either a WD-40 or any type of lubricants. If it does not have to move, duct tape. Probably that's the tool for some engineers. But going back to that idea that if it has to move, then you should put some lubricant in it.
And a couple of those spots that, might be out of sight, out of mind is each of our towers have some kind of gearbox or drivetrain on them. So making sure those are working properly to make sure each tower of that pivot is moving properly for the season is important too.
And on the opposite of getting things moving, are there things that people should maybe check are tight and not accidentally going to fall off?
Yes, the nuts and bolts are actually very important also the screws. If I'm going to wear my engineering hat again, there's those different types of nuts and bolts have different expansion and contraction during the winter time and also during the summertime. So each of them will move differently. So during those times, we would just like to make sure that all of them are properly fit and tight so that we don't have any untoward incident later on. Those untoward incident might be a downtime for our irrigation system, or it could be a safety issue as well. So something will fall off from the pivot. So just to make sure that all of the things are tied down and working properly. One of the things that we also caution people is also the nuts and bolts where the connections for the wires are. Because they may also cause some electrical issues as well. So even electrocution of some people around those systems if some of the wires are loose.
And along those lines, over the winter, you might have loosened up some drain plugs or those areas where any water we didn't want in the system was able to get out. We want to go back through and tighten all those up, tighten all of our gauges back into the system so we know we're running at the proper pressure, but also not having any locations we could be losing that pressure water throughout the system.
And other than water pressure, tire pressure and what's happening there is also really important. And what should we really remind growers to hopefully go take care of?
So tires might be another one of those objects of, sure, they look like they're inflated, but lots of up and down temperatures throughout the season can cause us to lose a proper tire pressure, just like we can in our vehicles. We want to make sure those tire pressures are where the manufacturer says for them, just so we have the proper footprint for our system to run, because any kind of out-of-balance pressure can cause extra wear and tear torque on our system, can also increase the amount of wheel tracks we have in a field as well, which we all know wheel tracks can cause some extra undue damage to even some equipment and make a less than pleasant ride through a field.
That's right. So unlike a car wherein we could feel that, it's low tire pressure, this is something that we don't feel, but definitely the system and the motors could actually feel it. So just making sure that they are all in the right pressure.
What are some other things for growers to remember when it comes to getting their irrigation systems ready to roll?
So we've kind of talked about the big picture items, making sure everything in line is working, making sure we don't hopefully have any leaks when we first pressure up for the season, but kind of going through every one of going down the line when you're pressured up for the first time, look at your water patterns, make sure you haven't had any of your drops or those nozzle bodies fall off during the season, just as warm and cool temperatures can cause a tire to lose pressure. It can loosen bands or the pieces that are holding those hoses onto those spigots or those goosenecks. And also making sure our pattern is pretty uniform throughout the field in that first time, just to make sure we're getting the most crop per drop when we start applying.
So a good idea to do like a quick test run and make sure everything looks good.
Yes, a quick test run and even a walk through the system itself. So what I would probably also suggest is going to the highest point of the system, highest point of the field, and go and checking the pressure at that particular point, because that is an indication if you have enough pressure for that particular area. Because at the highest point of the field, that's where you're going to lose or at least need more pressure for the system to be able to apply the water evenly. If the pressure, let's say that your drops are rated at 10 psi, we need at least 15 psi running through the system. So at the very end of your system, make sure that you have at least 15 psi on that pressure gauge. Otherwise, if it is less than that, then most likely the rest of the systems are not going to apply properly or uniformly the water.
And with that pressure being off at some point in the system, it typically means the rest of your pressure is off. And when your pressure is off, you're not getting that correct uniformity from those nozzles to apply water in the proper way. You may have areas of the field getting more or less water due to those pressure concerns. So if you can't remember what your pressure is supposed to be, always refer back to your pivot chart that also has your nozzle information as well.
Are there some things that maybe growers should keep stocked in case something breaks down? Are there common breakdowns that happen with pivot irrigation?
So I have just walked our system, and one of the things that we are losing sometimes are the pads for those spray pads. So make sure that you have the enough extra spray pads out there, because they are easy to lose, and if they hit the corn multiple times, at some point they will fall off. So that's one. And then just a different nozzle packages as well. So just make sure that if ever you see a nozzle package that is missing, replace them. But at the same time, make sure that is the right nozzle package for that particular point in time. And as Tinas mentioned, go back to your center pivot chart and see if that is the correct nozzle that should be in there. Because every time you put something there that is either over applying or under applying, then you're probably not optimizing that system for your operation.
Also, important factor, even if it's ready to go and we take off nicely, need to check in on it throughout this season.
Yes, it is important to at least walk through again from time to time. Make sure that there's no leaks. It doesn't tell us when there's going to be a leak. So just make sure that all of them are in proper condition.
Yeah, just because something's working now doesn't mean in a month or two it's still working, because there's lots of moving parts throughout a system, and every drop we can lose something. Like Jonathan mentioned, those nozzles, they might be small, but they are mighty, and make sure our system is applying water the way it should be.
Tina, Jonathan, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
That was K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan, and she was joined by K-State Water Resources engineer Jonathan Aguilar as they discussed preseason irrigation checks. If you'd like to read more on this topic, you can check out a recent Agronomy e-update article titled Preseason Irrigation Checklist, Maximize Efficiency and Minimize Issues. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or as always, you can find e-update articles by going to their website, eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk for this week's Milk Lines.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. In today's current climate, dairy heifer calves are in short supply, so calves being born on dairy farms are becoming increasingly valuable. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk discusses the importance of providing quality calf care at birth and soon after. He says the calf care provided can impact growth rate, milk production, and how long they stay in the herd.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning the increased need to pay attention to what we're doing in the calving area as well as the care for the young calves. It is amazing what small dairy calves are worth today. We see that sometimes we can get as much as $900 or $1,000 for a crossbred Holstein beef calf for the feedlot market. And dairy heifers are in short supply, so those heifer calves being born on your farm become increasingly valuable. However, as I review farm records and also visit farms, I see that we're probably missing some opportunities with young calves, considering the death rates that we sometimes see. And a lot of this just simply has to do with paying attention to details and making sure that we are very consistent in the care of the calf soon after birth. One of the biggest things we can do is just simply be present when the calf is born. And I know for smaller farms this is difficult when you have births that occur overnight when people generally aren't around the farm. However, we have technology such as cameras that we could install to monitor what's going on in the calving area from a distance. It's very, very critical that we still dip those navel cords soon after the calf is born. And please recognize that within about 30 to 60 minutes, that calf will be up and trying to find something to nurse. This is the second area that sometimes when we're not present leads to some health issues for that young calf. They will consume whatever they can get their mouth on, and if that means that there's manure on the bedding, yes, that's what will be ingested rather than colostrum. So feeding colostrum soon after birth is very, very important to the overall health of the calf, and it's important that that colostrum be high quality. Many times we might want to consider a second feeding of colostrum within the first 6 hours after birth if we're not feeding a gallon in the first feeding. This colostrum is important to protect the calf and provide for an immune system for the young calf until it can develop its own a few weeks down the road. Once we get the calf taken care of at birth, it's important that we continue to feed that calf a nutritious diet, making sure that they have an adequate growth rate. It has been shown that the nutrition program during the first 8 weeks of life is very, very important to the overall health of the calf as well as to their rate of growth, and this has significant impacts on their first lactation milk yield. And if we're sending them on to a feedlot later on, again, these same practices are still important for those animals as well, as we want to be shipping growthy calves to the feed yard industry. So making sure that we feed adequate liquid feed, and I would recommend an accelerated growth program where we feed more than the standard amount of milk replacer or waste milk to these animals so we get quicker growth and better health in these animals early on. And the final thing that we would like to address today is the fact that many times after weaning, from weaning till about 6 months of age, we see a depression in growth rates in our calves. This is because we haven't paid careful attention to the nutrition program that they're receiving. We know that calves that are stunted in growth through the first 6 months of life will likely exit our herd sooner and will have lower rates of milk production as a lactating animal. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to carefully review their calf-raising programs to see what efficiencies they might be able to gain from doing a better job of taking care of the details associated with calves right at birth and soon after.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.